We're going to talk today about how to get your modernization effort unstuck. My name's Sebastian. I am the CEO of a company named Expero, and we do a lot of software development in multiple industries, but especially financial services. And I think Adrian and I, when we practiced last night, agreed that this would sort of be a Johnny Carson, Ed McMahon type thing. So he'll be joining us to skewer my, my otherwise ill-prepared remarks. So what does Expero do? We work in financial services in a number of key ways. We help a lot of companies build new products from the ground up. One of the ones we're most excited about is a treasury trading platform called Open Door, interesting dark pool product. We do modernization projects in the front and middle office. We've done some interesting work in machine learning and analytics, especially in fraud, anti-money laundering spaces. Today, I hope you come visit our booth. Isn't that weird? It's a virtual conference with virtual booths. It's weird for us to come say hi, take a screenshot. And we're just going to show you some pictures and talk about things today that we have seen over the years as we've helped people try to modernize their project. What are people trying to do? There's a ton of people with either in-house suites or suites that face their customers that manage front and middle office functions that tend to, for the large part, be old. That doesn't mean they're bad. They do great things, but they're old. So they're stuck with some things that were pretty amazing 20 years ago, but are frustrating now. So they're trying to move from nightly reporting or sort of architectures, platforms, technologies that are hard to hire into or hard to build, or not impressive for customers to look at, and get a more real-time, more modern, more exciting, more analytics heavy focus. A lot of people are either building new apps that nonetheless have to play with their legacy ecosystem, or even looking at a whole suite of apps in their middle office and front office and saying, we need to modernize these so that our customers are impressed, or so that we can do more with fewer people. And then they're stuck. Too often, we find clients having tried to sort of eat too much at once, find themselves stuck. They're neither in nor out. Maybe they're half modernized or they've never really started. And sort of in a longer format, I think we could dive into 10 or 20 sort of deadly sins or ways to escape, depending on how you want to look at it. But today we're going to focus on, in our 15 minutes, kind of three major themes for how we see people get stuck in these projects, and kind of the three tracks we think they could use to unstuck themselves. And Adrian and I have seen a lot of people and struggle with this. And so Adrian's going to talk about sort of the three tracks that we often see people get stuck on.
Yeah, so what I'm just briefly going to allude to, and then I'll hand back over to Sebastian, who's going to delve into each one of these ones with a little bit of a case study on each, is the way to really think about this is as a tripod, right? So if we think about a stool tripod, we've got three legs. If we have three legs that are uneven, what are we going to have? We're going to have an unstable product. That's exactly the way that you need to go into thinking about when you're actually going through a modernization process. So we clearly have product. One element of product is product strategy. This is going to be essential when we're actually thinking about what we actually need to do. How are we actually going to get to product market fit? And I know the concept of product market fit is a little bit weird when you're actually thinking about an internal application, but rest assured, you actually need to focus on it. Too many people just assume that they have a captive audience and therefore they can put out whatever they can. That is not the way to actually go about things. So product strategy being really critical. The obvious element here is technology and data. We all know that we need the technology and data to develop a modern product. However, the other element that I would also allude to is this concept of design. Now, we're going to focus specifically on user experience here, but design is a much wider field than just user experience. But we will focus on that, and there is often a concern when people are going through web migration strategies that what they do is essentially put some lipstick on one of their old technology products. And this raises a lot of concerns, because the way to think about this is what has actually changed in the last 10, 20 years, or whenever the period is since you actually initially built that old product. What are the expectations? What are the implications of consumerization? So there's a lot of big, different things here. The most important piece of advice that I can give you is to have a senior leader in each one of these fields. It's critical not to have one person who's really senior and then two really junior people. That then gets back to that concept of the uneven stool. So having those three legs really being deep is really how we see people getting unstuck. Now, I'm going to hand back to Sebastian. He's going to talk through an example of each one of these 3 prongs.
Awesome, thanks, Adrian. So let's start with the one Adrian started with, product strategy. The typical stuck that we see is, wow, so-and-so suite is really big, where do we start? Or we started, but it's so much, we don't know how to complete. So, there's some foundational problems that need to be answered in product strategy. Adrian mentioned, you can't just assume you have a captive market anymore, or even if you do have a captive market, it's internal software. People may not like working on it because they have more advanced expectations from the consumer grade software they're using now. You can suffer attrition. You actually see people leaving companies because they hate the software they're using. So you need to address all of those things. What we're going to talk about today is just, wow, it's big. There's too much to do. A typical case we'll see is let's say there's 9 apps. There's a wall of apps that have been built over the last 10, 20 years. That make your middle office tool, let's say. So you've got a little portfolio viewer, and you've got a corporate actions editor, and you've got this analyst tool that someone built, and then that tool you built for important client X, back 7 years ago. And there's a wall of these things, and they've all been built in good faith, but they're all tangled together. And when you say we need to modernize them, your dev team says, well, they're all tangled together, and they're all written with stuff we don't like, and we need to rewrite them all. And so you get the Mr. Hair on Fire guy reaction. What you need to do from a product strategy perspective to help you is to cheat, make it smaller, do an actual product market fit, and figure out, gosh, in the 10 or 20 years since we started building these apps, let's admit that 3 of them aren't really important for our customers anymore, or they can find them somewhere else and we don't mind, right? It's not differentiating for us, or they've been replaced by some other tool. Let's retire them. Maybe there's 2 or 3 in the follow and coast categories here that we say, well, we still need to provide these services to our users or our customers, but we're okay if they're not particularly groundbreaking. They're commoditized. And then maybe there's 2 or 3 that are truly groundbreaking for you, they're differentiating for you. You want to kind of lead the market in these. So you didn't think about technology, you didn't worry about design, you did a market analysis, and you immediately changed the tenor of your problem to, even if it's not smaller, it's now much more structured. I got 3 to retire, 3 to rewrite, and 3 I'm going to go, maybe improve. And another analysis, yes, please, Adrian.
Sebastian, one thing that I think is important when we're going through this process is remember that product analytics are our friend. Right? People rebuild too many features that are not being used. So there was a recent survey that came out from Pendo. They went through B2B software, and they found that roughly 86% of all features were never used. If something is not being used, kill it. So kill your baby.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We show up at kickoffs for these things so often saying, all right, show us your analytics. Who's using what? We know very, very interesting, important client uses 80% of this, but what about everyone else? What's our opportunity here? And often it's not even instrumented. And one of the first steps is just to instrument these systems. That's a really good point. So then another thing we do when we come in with a product focus is try to identify what the value streams are. Again, these tools were often written opportunistically, but upon stepping back and looking at how users work now, how the market is now, you may find tracks through these products that are value stream focused that enable you to not just say, well, we've got 6 apps we're gonna tweak or rewrite. We've got 3 value streams we're going to enable now. And in fact, you may build 3 separate tools, 3 separate ways of looking at it, and just pull some of the pieces and parts out of your existing apps to go build those, and not just end up with some nicer looking or easier to maintain stuff, but with an actual face to the market that is more aligned with the actual value streams your users are actually using right now. And so again, in the best of worlds, you get to cheat a little bit and just do less because you're retiring. You get to cheat a little bit and do less because you're admitting that some things are now commodity, but you're also just putting a better foot forward.
Sorry, I was just going to say with those value streams, also don't forget to actually hypothesize a little bit. This is a great opportunity not to just go and say, I'm rebuilding the exactly same things. I might be building less of it, but actually ask, what are the user behaviors? How have they actually changed? What are the workflow needs today? Because if we are talking about a decade's difference, everything has changed. Every assumption that we made 10 years ago is probably invalid today. So let's make sure that we question all those assumptions in everything that we're doing in product strategy.
You're a good straight man, Adrian, because that's the next thing I want to talk about is how this surfaces in user experience. So A second way that we see some of these modernizations kind of stumble is that they become a cosmetics exercise, which sells it maybe a little bit short to the ambitions, but it's like, let's make it look better and be easier to use. And those are clearly good objectives. But as Adrian mentioned, not only are the user experience paradigms from 10, 20 years ago different and confusing now, or we have better ideas, users also change. So a typical exercise we'll do is walk through and understand how one of these value streams is working. I'm not going to read through this, but we'll actually put together sort of a user journey. In this case, someone actually looking at compliance and trying to figure out how some compliance failure is affecting their portfolio. One could look at it from the point of view of clicks. Oh, the grid is slow. It's too clicky to find this answer. We should use a better grid and streamline this into a wizard and make it more usable. But in fact, what they're really doing is not just answered by the tools they happen to be using. They are looking for ways to understand risk. There may be whole new ways to present it to them. It may be an alert-based workflow. It may be a search-based workflow. It may be a different way that you can present this problem to them or admit that they're exploring instead of just browsing. That's beyond just kind of the user experience. And a chart we often like to use is this one, where it is very easy for UX efforts, modernization efforts, to focus on these blue bits. It's ugly, it's out of fashion, it's hard to program, it's too clicky, our users are frustrated. Those are all important things, but in a modernization effort, your first focus needs to be on the orange bits, the who and the what. Who's using it, why are they using it, how are they using it? Because those will often suggest new and different ways to construct the application, which then of course render all the other sort of monkeying around you did in the blue bits in terms of look and feel busy work. Because once you've decided what the actual value streams are, then that work can kind of be done.
And Sebastian, that's like a really important point for me, because too often we see people putting, whether it's just the lipstick or whether they're actually gone through and done a great job on end user research, but they forget the implications on the back end, right? If I'm coming up with some really modern, outstanding user experience, in all likelihood, the back end from the old app will not actually be able to support those interactions.
Yeah, it's a great example.
About that.
That's right. I mean, quite often, one of the simplest ones is just search. Google has conditioned us to just expect a box everywhere where I can search. And it's been, brought into our mindsets. Often people are now expecting sort of a data exploration mode in their applications because they're trying to do higher value analysis rather than just, illustrate an idea. Here's your morning report of top 10 compliance breaks. No, I need to explore why I had a compliance break and what my options are. Well, search is just not built in the way people expect to use it into your standard sort of SQL Server database that holds a bunch of this stuff. That's a whole new functionality, not just in how you've posed the problem to the user, but how the backend supports it. So that brings us to the third pillar here, which is technology and data. As Adrian alluded to, a common issue that's seen is there's a lack of senior leadership on the tech team that is deeply familiar with or confident in some of the newer technologies that want to be used. It's a FinJS conference, so we think immediately about web development and desktop containers and stuff, and that is true and that is important, but it's also, as we just mentioned, backend, right? We're deploying to the cloud now instead of provisioned servers, and we have a more distributed in building this legacy product is often incredibly productive. They're domain experts. I mean, some of these apps we see, and there's 10 apps and there's 300 screens and there's like 7 people that have built and maintained it. They're in this really productive environment. And then you tell that team, okay, now how about you put it all on the web? And those guys are awesome at what they do, but they did not spend the last 10 years or even 5 years becoming, say, web development experts. And so they get stuck in a sort of assessment mode, science project mode. You know what, we need to do some evaluations. We've actually seen some clients spend 6 months deciding whether they should use React or Angular to build their application. And look, we'll sit and have that conversation with you, and I have a preference. It's React, by the way, but both work. You don't need to spend 6 months wondering which one to use. You need to be confident or have someone help give you confidence that one of those choices works, and then spend those 6 months actually building your project. Typical failure modes we've seen are, I'm just going to go through 3 here on the time we have left. One is, especially on the back end, A development team goes from a model where they deploy an app or maybe 10 apps in a basic client server pattern. I've got some databases, I've got some app servers, I've got user desktops. That's not necessarily simple, but it is well understood and deployed by the organization. And then they say, aha, now I need to, and they go read blogs and they attend conferences and they have smart ideas. And then all of a sudden, before you've written a line of code, you have 10 microservices defined and 3 different compute servers and multi-cloud capability and multi-region, and you've got an architecture diagram that could fell an elephant at 100 yards, and you haven't started anything yet, and you now have a huge sort of DevOps or technology capability hurdle to go over before you can deploy a line of code. And then the budget owner says, why do you need 16 people to do this modernization when 7 of you built the whole thing to begin with? And often the answer is that it's just too complicated. The modern buffet of technology choices has some really delicious dishes in it that really do make your life easier, but it should not be treated as an all-you-can-eat buffet. It is possible to just make this too big of a science project and forget to focus on the actual business value of the product you're trying to do. Science projects are another thing we see. So people admit that, well, we don't need to go all the way to this complex endpoint, but we do need to try some things. You know, we're not really sure whether Angular or React is the best framework. So we're going to actually try both, or try one, then the other. Well, a senior leader with intuition should be able to help decide whether that is a choice that should be debugged, like maybe with a technical proof of concept, or if you should just let it be, make the choice and move on faster. Search is an interesting example where, okay, the kinds of search we need to implement are very dependent on the kinds of back-end services we have, the kinds of user experience and product strategy we're trying to support. I can very easily see that being a science project worth doing. What kinds of search should we implement? It's actually not trivial to answer that question. Other science projects, like how are we going to deploy to the cloud and how many microservices should we have, can usually be much more easily dispatched by sort of not engaging in side projects. And finally, Adrian, you kind of hinted at this before. One of the biggest things we see, honestly, is a bit of a failure of inventorying the problem at hand. So we talked a couple of times about how a new set of expectations in a modern front end can easily imply a large uplift on the back end. Search, again, being my favorite example, but there's a lot. What if scenarios, you know, temporal comparisons, expensive analytics to go run, integration of data science workflows, you know, notebooks and such. There's a lot of things that often happen on the back end that are implied by modern user expectations. The other inventory failure that we see happen is that if you're in the mindset that you are going to do a front end uplift, often we as a product consultancy, as software guys, get walked into an opportunity and say, we've got the back end and the services all figured out. We need you to help design and build us a new front end. And we'll do that work, and we've done it. But often the team as a whole doesn't realize how much of that old front end contained key business logic, key ideas and workflows that don't exist in the back end. And so the conception of how big the project is even cut short a little bit because no one has done that inventory. And then the architectural challenge of deciding, well, how do we get all of that, you know, business logic, you know, quarterly accruals and preferences and filters and such available in the backend services when no one wants to program in VB.NET anymore. All that stuff is sitting in some front end tool. How do we get into the backend? And so in addition to it sort of being a UX anti-pattern, oh yeah, just put lipstick on the pig, the front end will look better, where you forget to fix the back end. It can also be an inventory failure where you don't realize actually how much of your application is in the so-called front end. And you need to just understand that the project is bigger or find ways to cheat and do a smaller part of it.
I think with that, we can wrap up, Sebastian, and move into the Q&A room. So if anyone has follow-up questions, join us in the Q&A room, and otherwise get forward to the next presentation.
Thanks for joining us. See you there. Bye-bye, everyone.